Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessie, and I am the director of the Downtown Oakland Senior Center. I'd like to welcome you to our presentation, How to Age in Place, Hiring and Working with a Caregiver. And today it is being presented by Legal Assistance for Seniors. We have Darren Vaughn with us representing Legal Assistance for Seniors, and I'm going to turn it over.
Hi, thank you, Jesse. So, as mentioned, my name is Darren Vaughn. Let me just start sharing my screen real quick. And what I will also say is, once I'm presenting, it's very difficult for me to, see the chat box or see any hands. So, if you have a question, or if I'm talking too fast, or if you want me to repeat something, feel free to just chime on in. I'm happy to just accommodate. So, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So, as mentioned before, my name is Darren Vaughn. I'm here on both behalf of Legal Assistance for Seniors and HICAP, and the presentation is How to Age in Place, Hiring and Working with a Caregiver. Now, before we start talking about caregivers, let me first talk a little bit about the organizations I'm here on behalf of today. So, Legal Assistance for Seniors, who are we? Well, we're a nonprofit agency that's been serving seniors and others in Alameda County since 1976. Our mission has been and continues to be to ensure the independence and dignity of seniors by protecting their legal rights through education, counseling, and advocacy. And lastly, our legal, community education, and individual Medicare counseling services are all free of charge. So, on the legal end of the spectrum, what we help with are government benefits, be it Social Security, SSI, or CAPI, which stands for the Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants, senior immigrant issues such as renewing a visa or applying for a citizenship, elder abuse prevention, and caregiver issues. These are usually interlinked, and how I would view them is we have elder abuse attorneys on staff, and they're able to give an idea to somebody who's suffering abuse what their options are on a legal spectrum. And then also they can help get a restraining order filed if that's what somebody wants to do. We also have planning for the future on here. We unfortunately don't help with wills, trusts, or estates. Instead, what we do provide advice on is advanced healthcare directives. It's a legal document that essentially outlines what your healthcare wishes and desires are. So if you're unable to speak, either due to an illness or an accident, it outlines what your wishes are so they can be respected by people administering your care. We also help with healthcare coverage. We primarily focus on Medicare, but we do assist with Medi-Cal issues as well. And then we do have a housing department. Now, our housing department is small, so most of the time it's done on a limited case-by-case basis. But if you have any housing issues, please feel free to contact us. Even if we can't help you, we'll try to point you in the right direction. So you may have seen the word HICAP thrown around a few times. What HICAP stands for is the Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program. And what it does is it provides assistance with Medicare and related health insurance by offering free and objective information to consumers about their benefits and their options. So if you ever make an appointment with HICAP, it's 100% free. And what we mean by objective is we're funded by federal, state, and local funds. We're not going to sell you anything because all we do is provide information. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them to HICAP. Again, it's free. And we have no incentive to lie because, again, we're funded by the government. Something important to keep in mind as well with HICAP. So every state in the country has a SHIP office. SHIP is a federal program that's meant to have every state create their own SHIP office that's meant to provide free information about Medicare. California wanted to be a little different, so instead of saying California's SHIP office, we call it HICAP. Now, every state has their own SHIP office, and beyond that, every county in California also has their own HICAP office. So if you move out of Alameda County, look for your county's HICAP office, and if you move out of California, look for that state's SHIP office. Now, through HICAP, we do several things. Firstly, we receive federal and state funds through the Alameda County Area Agency on Aging. Beyond that, if you make an appointment with HICAP, you will be given an appointment and matched with a HICAP counselor. All of our counselors are registered with the state of California, and they're all licensed too. So In order to get that license, they needed to fulfill initial educational requirements. And in order to keep that license, they also have to fulfill continuing educational requirements because Medicare changes every year. And unfortunately, it can be rather complicated. So we want to make sure we're giving the most accurate and up-to-date information possible. Now, we used to offer HICAP appointments at 30 plus locations throughout the county. COVID put a dent in that. So now what we do instead is all of our appointments are done through the phone. If you're uncomfortable with having a phone appointment where the counselor calls you, what you can do instead is have it done through Zoom. And if you're uncomfortable with Zoom as well, a very, very limited number of our counselors are willing to meet in person at our offices in Oakland. But again, I can't guarantee you'd be able to meet any of our counselors in person. You would just need to call and ask, and hopefully they can accommodate. We also offer educational presentations throughout the county, much like the one you're at right now, to help Medicare beneficiaries know their rights and their options. And then if for whatever reason your HICAP counselor notices either, Social Security, or if you have a Medicare Advantage plan, maybe the third-party insurance company isn't operating the way they legally should be. We do have attorneys on staff, so if your counselor can't do anything beyond that point, it can be referred to our legal department where they can assist, and that, like everything else we do, would be free. So let's jump into caregiving. So before we talk about caregivers, I think the most important distinction to make is between the two different kinds of them. There's home health care, and then there's personal care services. So home health care, I think a good way to think about it would be something that's skilled. So the only people who can administer home health care are people who either are licensed or went to school to get a degree for what they can administer. While personal care services, on the other hand, are more what you need every day, but doesn't necessarily need somebody who's trained in helping administer that care. So home health care, for instance, physical, occupational, or speech therapy would all qualify as home health care. And that fits the mantra of skilled care because, again, in order to become a therapist for any of those, you'd have to go to school for a bit. Skilled nursing, you need a nurse. Medical social services, you need somebody who probably has a degree in social service work. A registered dietitian, they're educated on how to administer and create a personalized diet plan. Now, home health aides are different in the sense that they basically provide personal care services. So they'll assist you in order to maintain your health and treat your illness or injury while you're receiving skilled care. So they can be covered under home health care, but it's only while you're receiving some other form of skilled care. Now, personal care services, as I mentioned before, are more of the everyday things in life that you might need help with. So, for instance, if you need help bathing, dressing, or using the restroom, if you need assistance with exercising or just walking around the house, if you need help with housekeeping duties, cooking food, doing your own laundry, if you need somebody to drive you around, things to that extent. Now, the reason why this is important is because it does change who pays for these services. Now, home health care, skilled care, would typically be more expensive, but it's also usually covered under Medicare. Medicare Part A, which is your hospital insurance, should fully cover skilled care with no copays. And Medicare Part A is the part of Medicare that you don't have a premium on if you have worked the necessary amount of work period. So again, it should be completely covered. Your Medicare Part B, which is your medical insurance, might kick in as well for some home health care items. And that's the one where you pay 20% of a coinsurance and you pay a premium for it. But that's mostly just to supply durable medical equipment that would be needed by your skilled care professional. So for instance, let's say you have a skilled nurse come over to your home and she needs an insulin pump in order to administer care properly. Well, you might be charged the 20% coinsurance for that insulin pump, but Medicare Part A should cover the nurse's fee entirely. Now, Medicare Part C is your Medicare Advantage plan. And an Advantage plan is when your Medicare services are administered by a different organization rather than the US government. So, for instance, the very popular and most common one in Alameda County is Kaiser. That's an Advantage plan. Now, how Advantage plans work legally is that they have to provide everything that Medicare through the government does, but they can charge differently for how they administer care. So there's 42 different Advantage plans in Alameda County. So it's very variable depending on the plan you have. But there may be co-pays for your skilled care depending on the plan you're enrolled in. And again, if you have any questions about your Advantage plan, you can either contact HICAP, which has a comprehensive list of the differences between Medicare Advantage plans, or you can contact your plan yourself and find out what they cover. Now, unfortunately, personal care services, so again, just things you do every day in life, like walking around, eating, using the restroom, those are a lot harder to get covered. Medicare, most of the time, won't cover anything under personal care. The only time they will is when you're receiving skilled care, because home health aides can give you personal care, but the moment you stop receiving your skilled care, that would go away. So how do you pay for it? Well, you pay out of pocket. If you have enough money in the bank, you could just keep paying a caregiver to administer care for you forever, how long you might need it. You could purchase long-term care insurance. Of course, you would have to buy this before you need it, but you could look at different policies and find if there's one that might work for you. Of course, like all insurances, you're buying it for protection in case you ever need it. Some people never use their long-term care insurance policy, but it's another avenue to look into. Now, if you qualify for Medi-Cal, which has income and asset requirements, you could enroll in the in-home support services program. What that does is it allows the state of California to pay somebody to be a caregiver for you. You would have to apply for that program separately outside of Medi-Cal, but you could also have a caregiver in mind enroll to become a caretaker. So, for instance, let's say you have a neighbor who already comes over and takes care of you for free. You can enroll in-home support services, have them become a provider, and then the state can pay for them. So no money comes out of your pocket, and they get compensated for taking care of you. Now, as I mentioned before, Medicare Advantage plans, there's a lot of them. They're very variable. Some of them can, on very limited and under certain circumstances, they may cover some personal care services. But again, it depends on your plan, and you have to either contact HICAP or contact them to find out if they even offer any personal care services. Now, if you're a veteran who served during wartime, through the VA, you might receive some aid in attendance. But again, that'd be through the VA, and you'd have to contact them to find out what benefits they may have. So there's a lot going on in the slide. What I will say is this is for making sure Medicare covers skilled healthcare. This is the criteria Medicare uses to evaluate whether Medicare Part A will cover a caregiver. And I'm just going to go through this and try to make it as simple as possible. So the number one most important thing you need is your doctor. They need to certify that home health care is medically necessary for you. And this, they have to draft a plan. And then after drafting the plan, there must be a face-to-face visit with your doctor, either 90 days before starting your home health care or 30 days after starting home health care. After that, the other criteria Medicare looks at is whether you're homebound. Now, homebound does not mean bed-bound. You're allowed to walk around and you're allowed to have mobility. What they mean by homebound is they want absences from your home, so leaving the house, to be infrequent and generally difficult. Because they want to make sure that there's a reason why you can't go to either the hospital or some other facility to receive your skilled care. So you're allowed to take walks around the block. You're allowed to go to church, but they do want to see that it is difficult for you to leave the house. Now then, if you do require skilled care, it needs to be done on an intermittent basis. So it has to be less than 7 days a week. So it can't be every day, but it can also be more infrequent. 60 days is a cutoff. So if you need skilled care more than once every 60 days, then you fall in that intermittent basis category, at which point Medicare can cover skilled care for you. And this works for skilled nursing, skilled physical therapy, speech therapy, or occupational therapy. And now, like everything with Medicare, you do need it to be administered by a Medicare certified provider. That's simply because that's a provider stating that we'll take Medicare's money, and also Medicare stating that this is a legitimate provider. Now, if all of these conditions are met, you should have Medicare Part A kick in and cover your home health care entirely. That's what the law says. Unfortunately, not everybody follows what the law says. So here are some common things that people hear about for reasons why they're denied care, or why a home health care agency will say, oh, well, Medicare probably won't pay for this. These are just excuses more often than not. So here's a good way to just identify them. So if Medicare coverage is denied because your condition is chronic and you're stable, that's illegal. You don't need any restorative potential from the skilled care you receive. So the reason why we know this is because a couple years back, there was a court case where a patient was diagnosed with ALS, which is a degenerative muscle disease, and they were receiving skilled physical therapy. After a bit of time, the physical therapist, they noticed that the muscles were still degenerating, and they thought, well, this isn't helping, so, I'll quit. At which point, the patient's condition declined significantly. So even though they weren't getting better with the physical therapy and they weren't stable, it was creating additional quality of life that was greatly diminished, and they passed away shortly afterwards. The court ruled that it doesn't need to make you better. It doesn't have to, fix a chronic condition or make you stable. As long as your doctor certifies it and you meet the other conditions, you should be able to get skilled healthcare covered. You also want to be careful of anyone insisting that there's arbitrary caps on coverage. For instance, if a home health agency tells you that a nurse can only come once a day, and if they come more, then Medicare won't cover it, that's not true. There's also no legal limit to the duration of the Medicare home health benefit. As long as your doctor keeps certifying that you need it and all the other conditions are met, you should be able to have skilled healthcare for as long as medically necessary. So if they say, oh, you've been receiving care for 5 years, Medicare won't pay us anymore, that's wrong. And something to keep in mind is just your doctor is your most important ally. If it looks like your coverage is going to be denied, talk to your doctor. Make sure they advocate for you and that they say, no, you need home health care. It's not possible for them to, leave the house, and this is necessary for their own medical condition. And now, something very important as well. In order to appeal a Medicare denial, it needs to be filed. There needs to be a claim filed for Medicare. What can happen is a home health agency might state, oh, Medicare is not going to cover that. Like, we're not even going to bother submitting a claim. So you want to make sure you request in writing that the home health agency files a Medicare claim. Because if they don't, then you don't have a way of appealing it. If they do file a claim and Medicare denies it, then you can go to your doctor and they can advocate for you. I see we have something in the chat.
Yeah, I can read it for you.
Sure.
It says, does dementia qualify for a medical condition?
So how it works is, again, you would have to speak to your doctor regarding whether home health care would be applicable to your condition. So ultimately, it's a judgment call on your doctor and the kind of skilled care you would receive. Personally, just from my own personal knowledge here on dementia, unfortunately, I don't know if it would be covered under skilled healthcare, because maybe there'd be a kind of therapist that could be advocating for you, but generally, a lot of the issues with dementia do fall under personal care services instead. But still, if you talk to your doctor, they'll have a better answer for you, and hopefully they can, let you know what works and what doesn't. Now then, moving away from how Medicare covers skilled healthcare, if you're hiring a caregiver for your own personal care needs, it's important to first consider what you want. So imagine the quality of life you want. So picture an ideal day and what's necessary for that ideal day to happen. So you want to determine the level of assistance that you need in order to make that ideal day a reality. Write down your needs and your limitations, your likes and your dislikes, and your expectations. And it's really important. Hiring a caregiver can be very expensive. You want to make sure you know what your needs are, as in things you need in order to, have a good quality of life versus what you want. Things that would be very nice to have, but you can live without, because sometimes additional duties can cause a caregiver to become more expensive. And now it's always important to talk to your doctor to get any authorizations or recommendations when it comes to caregivers. Your doctor can give you ideas of what you might need assistance with, but also you need their authorization for quite a few payout methods. So for instance, Medicare for skilled healthcare, they obviously need a doctor's authorization, as that's one of the prongs. Long-term care insurance policies usually also require a doctor's report confirming the need for personal care services. This is simply done because otherwise everyone would probably use their long-term care insurance, and insurance companies like to have their money. Medi-Cal also requires a doctor's authorization for in-home support services before you can enroll in the program. So then, what else should you consider? Well, something important to consider is just who's going to pay the caregiver. Do you have enough money in your bank account to do that, or will your family be chipping in? And then for how long do you envision having that caregiver? At that point, you want to try to create a realistic budget going off of what you know. Because you want to make sure you can pay for a caregiver, but also pay for other expenses in your life as well. You also want to find a reputable home care agency if you plan on hiring through an agency. And if you hire privately, you have to decide how you're going to be paying your caregiver. Are you going to pay them through cash? Is there going to be a payroll system? Or do you have another idea in mind? And something important I'll just say right now is there's two main methods of hiring a caregiver for personal care services. You can hire through an agency, or you can hire privately. And we'll get into both the benefits and the cons of those different methods later. You also have to decide who is the boss. Are you going to be the administrator, or is somebody else going to be? You can offload it to perhaps one of your children instead. But you do need to decide who's going to be responsible for the entire hiring process if you're hiring privately. Are you going to be looking through resumes, running background checks, and interviewing them? How is that going to look? You have to look into who's going to be taking reports of how the caregiver is administering care. You also want to look into who's going to communicate duties to the caregiver. So who's going to let them know what is expected of them? And then also you have communicating with the agency. If you're using an agency, who's going to be the main contact? Who's going to be talking to the agency to make sure that to voice any grievances or to state if the caregiver is doing the job properly. Now, something important to keep in mind as well. If you delegate these responsibilities to somebody else, let's say your child, for instance, you should still have the final say in all these decisions. The caregiver is there to assist you. You're going to be the one affected the most by these decisions. You should always be sure that you're comfortable with every decision made, because ultimately it affects you the most. So where can you find a caregiver? Well, if you're going through an agency, you can look online. They do some advertising as well. You can ask senior centers, but you might want to have a few questions in mind if you're going to talk to an agency rep. So first off, you want to look, is the agency licensed by the state? If they're licensed by the state, that means they're likely to be legitimate. They have a lot more incentive to provide quality and legal care. And how long have they been in business? If they've been in business for a long time, they probably have seen a lot of cases that have come up with caregivers, and they have a better idea of how to train a caregiver and to deal with any grievances that may occur. You want to see, are their caregivers licensed and insured? If the caregivers are licensed, they have an incentive to provide quality care. They wouldn't want to lose their license. And if they're insured, you don't have to worry about them possibly suing you. Although usually in an agency situation, if they're going to sue, they'll usually sue an agency instead. So how does the agency train, supervise, and monitor their caregivers? These are just good questions to ask because you want to make sure there's a supervision aspect so you know that the caregivers are evaluated to be good. And then also, a very good tip, I would say, is to request that the agency sends you a packet of information that describes their services, their fees, and a list of references so you can review that information all before you sit down face-to-face with an agency representative. This lets you go through all the information, compile a good idea of how the agency works, and if you have any particular questions that may arise, if you can sit on it, you can sleep on it, and it lets you have a lot of time to come up with what you want to ask. And also, there's no social pressure with a packet. You don't have to worry about getting through it fast. So when you do sit down face-to-face with an agency representative, you're prepared. Now, what some agencies allow you to do as well, they do allow you to set up a trial service to test if they're a good fit for your needs. So you would want to do this before you actually need a caregiver. So, before a crisis or an emergency situation, so you can evaluate their quality of care and decide if they're a good fit or not. Now, if you choose to hire privately instead, you might want to use a registry. So what a registry is it's essentially a list of caregivers within a certain area. It'll provide the information of what they're licensed in, what they can do, and also their contact information. Now, usually registries do take a bit of money in order to obtain, but once you have them, you do have a list of the contact information of a lot of caregivers within your area. We have one method of finding them here. We have a phone number and a website. I'll send the slide deck over to Jessie and she'll be able to send it out to all of you. So am I right on that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'd also like to take this moment because we do have a few people joining us on phone. And so if anyone on the phone has a question, you're going to go ahead and press *6 to unmute yourself. And so *6 will unmute yourself so we can hear you and you can talk. If you are on Zoom on a laptop, computer, or tablet, just tap your screen or wiggle your mouse and you can unmute yourself that way. We had a little bit of background noise, so I've muted everyone. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Definitely. And again, if you have a question, I'm happy to answer it either right now or there'll be time for questions after the presentation as well. So whenever you feel like you need to ask. Beyond registries as well, if you're hiring privately, you can look at local colleges. If you go to a nursing program, some nurses are, training to become an at-home nurse. So they might really appreciate having an opportunity to, gain experience and also, additional money. You can also go to a community college. You can look at their home health aid programs because, again, they're literally training to become a home health aide. So this is on-the-job experience they can get, or a certified nursing assistant program, because, again, they would also probably have some at-home visits as well. There's some other methods in order to find a caregiver. Personally, my favorite on this list, if you're hiring privately, would be to get a personal referral from either a friend or a neighbor who've employed a caregiver in the past. If they really enjoyed their caregiver, they don't really have a reason to lie to you. And again, if you know them well and they're giving a good review of a caregiver, it's probably safe to hire them. But again, you want to make sure that your needs are the same as your neighbor, or talk to the caregiver after you contact them as well. Now, you can consult the community. Due to the internet, we have some interesting ways to get a good idea of a community. There's Nextdoor, there's Facebook groups, and there's local community web pages. I'd be careful with all of those. It's very easy to lie about who you are online. People might have a vested interest in misrepresenting the quality of care that a caregiver may provide if they're related to them. So I'd be careful. It's an option, but I wouldn't consider it one of your first options for looking for a caregiver. There's also senior centers and local houses of worship. I would say those are better avenues. Uh, they interact with a lot of people who need caregivers, and they have an idea of who the caregivers in a community are, and they can give recommendations. I see Larry has a question.
Larry, feel free to, perfect.
Yes, thank you. I have a COVID-related question.
Okay.
Prior to COVID, and I have Medicare with Kaiser being the administrator of my plan. Pre-COVID, as part of having chronic pain, I was going in twice a month for group acupuncture. I was once a month getting biofeedback. With COVID, the department has closed down to personal visits, no group sessions. How much can Kaiser, different administrators bend services or change things around? Kaiser has no plan of right now of going back.
So what I will say is COVID's made things a lot more difficult. In general, a lot of things change in the medical industry, and a lot of people are, falling through gaps. And I wish there was a better answer for this rather than ultimately Kaiser is a third-party insurance company, and they're able to administer Medicare how they want. Maybe this falls under skilled care. I'm sure you've already done this. You can contact Kaiser. Maybe you can contact HICAP. Maybe they can find a bit more information. You can probably look a bit harder into, the Medicare home health care policies, and maybe they'll find something that, obligates Kaiser to provide some kind of care, or something you can talk to your doctor about as well. So I would recommend a HICAP appointment at the very least to hopefully find out if there's something that can be done about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Beyond, senior centers and local houses of worship, what you could also do is contact the area agency on aging. Much like senior centers, they're also dealing with the aged population a lot. So they have a lot of experience with caretakers within an area, and they should have a general idea of who can be useful and who can help. So you can ask them for recommendations as well. Now then, in-home support services. So again, if you qualify for Medi-Cal, you can qualify for in-home support services. You can either find some registered providers through the public authority. We have their phone number up there. But you can also have a family member, a friend, or a neighbor enroll and go through the process of becoming an in-home support services provider. My mother did this for my grandmother earlier this year, and the process itself was not very time consuming. And you just have to submit a few documents and attend a 1-hour course. And then beyond that, you can become registered as a provider, and then, the state can help pay whoever your caregivers are. There are also some local resources out there. Unfortunately, the first one we're going to talk about is only in the Berkeley area. It's called Easy Does It. They do assist with emergency caregiving needs. So if you have a primary caregiver and they're either on vacation or they get injured and they're not able to provide caregiving services to you, you can contact Easy Does It. They'll get a temporary emergency caregiver who will take care of you until your primary caregiver comes back. There's also JSAY. They have a caregiver directory. So JSAY is an organization that primarily focuses on Japanese elderly immigrants, but their caregiver directory is open for anyone who asks for it. And they provide a lot of information on, caregivers available. So you can either go to their website or you can contact them, and they'll give you their list of caregivers. There's also the Family Caregiver Alliance. What they do is they provide a lot of information for people looking into hiring a caregiver privately. So then, again, as I mentioned before, the main ways you can hire a caregiver is either through an agency or privately. The main difference between the two is that if you hire through an agency, you have a lot less of a headache to deal with regards to payroll laws and paperwork in general. But there's going to be a lot less customization. You're not going to be able to get everything you want usually. Oh, if you hire privately, it'll be cheaper, but there's a lot more effort in, both the hiring process and in determining how to pay somebody, as well as needing somebody to fill in the last minute. So just working through the benefits of an agency. You can get help with your care plan because they have a lot of case managers usually who can help look over your care plan, and they also have a lot of experience, so they have an idea of what you might want. They also pre-screen their workers, so you don't have to worry about running a background check on your caregivers because that should have already been done. You can also find people, they already hire people who have relevant experience with a variety of needs. So they should have caretakers that can accommodate you. They also provide backup care. So again, if your caregiver falls sick or if they take vacation, they should be able to put in a temporary caregiver for you, and you shouldn't have to look for one yourself. There's also the ability to change a caregiver quickly if you need to change. If you hire a caregiver and you're not happy with them, just contact the agency and they can send somebody else to you. If you were hiring privately, you'd have to go through a whole other round of hiring. You'd have to look at resumes, interviews, and background checks. Now, agencies also allow you to have somebody to report to or get help resolving issues if an issue comes up. So you don't have to talk to the caregiver yourself. You can ask their supervisor instead. There's also liability protection. Again, if something happens to the caregiver on the job, the employer is the agency, not you. So you're protected a lot more in a legal sense from lawsuits. There's also no paperwork with payroll, scheduling, or taxes. You don't have to worry about that as that's the agency's job. Now then, what are the issues with it? Well, it's usually more expensive than private pay. And beyond it being more expensive, something important to keep in mind as well is that the caregiver is usually being paid less because that money is being dispersed to the administrative staff as well and the case managers. Your choices are also limited to the staff they have. So if you have a general time frame in mind for when you want to have a caregiver come over, if they don't have any staff who's available for that time frame, you're not going to be able to get it. There's also a lot less flexibility around duties, hours, and overtime. The agency will usually have their own mandated hours and overtime, and then duties you might have to end up paying more if you require some more extensive care. A lot of times agencies will also have a minimum hour requirement. So if you only want a caregiver for maybe like an hour or two a day, but the agency has a limit or a minimum limit of 3 hours or more, then unfortunately it might not fit and you might have to pay more than you would like to. They may also schedule more than one caregiver if the work hours aren't consistent. So that means you'd have to deal with the stress of letting somebody else in your home and accommodating them and making sure everybody's on the same page, as that just becomes exhausting. They can also experience more staff turnover. The issue with an agency is if somebody is going to leave the agency, even if you really like them as a caregiver, there's not much you can do. Because again, you're not the employer, the agency is. If you were hiring privately, you could offer them a raise. You can try to work through a different schedule for them. But when it's an agency, they simply quit. They may also limit or charge more for certain tasks because, again, the agency is the one deciding the payment, not you. So what if you're using a registry or a personal referral, otherwise known as, you're hiring privately? Oh, you're able to look a lot harder for people who suit your interest. If you want to speak a different language than English, maybe you have a mother tongue that you'd like to talk in, such as Spanish. You could look for a caregiver who speaks that. Or you're going to be spending a lot of time with your caregiver if you're really into football, for instance. Maybe you want to find a caregiver who also is interested in football, so you have something to talk about. There's also flexible hours around part-time or unusual schedules, because ultimately there's only two people deciding the hours. It's you and the caregiver. If you find something that works for both of you, then great, that's it. Now, you also spend less. Usually hiring privately is cheaper, and hiring a personal caregiver is expensive a lot of the time. So you usually end up paying less, and the caregiver gets paid more because it's going straight to their pocket instead of the agency, paying other employees as well. You also have the ability to set rules and expectations. Because again, you're the employer in the situation, so you're the one outlining what you want. Now, the issues of course, it just takes a lot longer. Your hiring process is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort because you have to run a background check, you have to look through resumes, and you have to interview candidates. And just for some assistance when it comes to calling references and doing background checks, we have a link here to caregiver.org, and they have some background checking resources to help people who've never done that before. Another issue is emergency coverage. If your caregiver that you hire becomes sick, they have an accident, or they just take vacation, you're going to have an issue of not having them for a while. You'll have to find somebody pretty fast to help take care of you. I see there's a chat message. Will it be possible to have copies of these slides? So again, I'll send these slides over to Jessie, and she should send them all out to all of you. Beyond that, we also have, you have to deal with a lot of paperwork. So because you're their employer, you do need to get an employer identification number. You'll have to withhold and pay Medicare, Social Security, and other unemployment taxes. Something important to keep in mind. On the next slide, we will discuss a little bit about how you can not have to deal with that directly. You can also obtain liability and workers' compensation insurance for your own protection. It's a good idea because, again, you're the employer here. So if lawsuits occur, you'll have some protection there. You'll also have to eat any training costs for a caregiver. Let's say you hire them with some specific duties in mind and your condition may worsen, at which point you might need them to cover more duties that they're not trained for. Well, if you send them to a training class, usually you're going to be the one paying for it. If you have an agency, they'd be the ones paying. And then ultimately, you are responsible for any complaints you have about the care. If you're unhappy with your caregiver, you'll have to do the hard part of talking to them and working through what they could be doing better. And ultimately, if it doesn't work out, you'd have to be the one to fire them, and you'd have to look into, both California and local labor laws in order to do that correctly. So here are just some job description tips from the Family Caregiver Alliance. I think these are all very good questions to think about when it comes to just hiring a caregiver in general. So first off, you want to think about what kind of training level you want them to have. Do you want them to have a CNA, which is a certified nursing assistant license? Do you want them to be LVN, which is a licensed vocational nurse? Or are you happy with them just being a home health aide? Because again, depending on your condition, maybe you don't need somebody who's incredibly qualified. How do you want driving to be handled? Do you want them to help drive you around? If they're driving you around, do you want them to use their car or do you want them to use your car? Are going to reimburse them for mileage? And if they're going to be driving you, you probably want to check in with the DMV to check their driving record. You want to make sure they don't have DUIs. You want to make sure they're not a reckless driver, because again, you're going to be in the car with them. Transferring skills are very important too. You might find somebody who fits all the other skills that you want, but if they're not able to lift you up out of a bed, out of a chair, or use a Hoyer lift to pick you up, then maybe they're not a good fit, because that's very important if you struggle with mobility. Now, if you do have either a memory or a cognitive impairment, like a brain degenerative disease, it might be important to look for somebody who has experience dealing with such issues. It's simply because those are really hard to deal with. And if you have somebody experienced with it, they might have a better idea and a better understanding of how to help take care of somebody who's going through those awful conditions. Language skills. So again, if you want to speak to somebody in a language other than English, you can stipulate that. Do you expect them to do any housekeeping? So do you want them to help cook? If they're helping cook, do you want specific kinds of food or cuisine? And then also, do they need to accommodate a special diet, for instance? Now, do you have a pet? If you do you expect them to help take care of them, or are they okay with having a pet? For instance, are they allergic to dogs or cats? That's always something to look out for. Smoking is another thing. Do you smoke? Do you want them to smoke? If that's okay, where can they smoke? Are they going to smoke in your backyard? If you're both smoking, maybe you just light up 2 cigars in your house. It's up to you. And now hours. You do want to make sure you stipulate what days and what times you're hiring people for, because again, you want to make sure you find a schedule that works for both of you. Now, wages. Are you going to pay them on an hourly basis, or are you going to pay them on a shift basis? How are you going to handle holiday vacation, or sick pay? And again, you want to make sure you follow California labor laws, because again, you are an employer in this situation, so you do have to do things legally. And then how is the caregiver going to be paid? How are you going to withhold and pay taxes such as Social Security, Medicare, disability, and unemployment? Are you going to pay them with cash or check? Are you going to pay them on a weekly, a semi-monthly, or a monthly basis? Are they going to be an employee or a contract worker? Because that determines whether you're going to give them a W-2 or a 1099. That's a lot. I've never managed a business before. I think the majority of people haven't either. These are all questions that I don't think a lot of people know how to answer. What you can do instead is you can go to an accountant or a household employee payroll service and pay them to manage all of these questions instead. Because first off, it provides a layer of protection because they're the ones administering it, and then also it's just a load off your back in terms of stress, because this sounds like a lot to manage and deal with, and you'd have to be doing it pretty often. Also, when it comes to food, are you going to be providing food, or are they going to have to bring their own food from home? These are just all things to think about when you're choosing to hire somebody privately, things to put in the job posting, and also things to ask when interviewing them. Let's shift focus a little bit. So then, can you get assistance when you're in an assisted living facility or nursing home? You actually can. You can choose to hire a caregiver to work with a person living in a facility where there's already some level of care being provided. And why would you want to do this? Well, a lot of care facilities, they'll offer care, but they can't be with you the whole day. They have a bunch of other residents to help take care of as well. So if you want that personalized care, you can have a caregiver hired to just help you. Of course, this is expensive. You'd have to pay for the caregiver, but you'd also have to be paying for the assisted living facility. And those prices are already pretty pricey. On our slide here, we say it's about $3,000 to $10,000 a month. That's before COVID. I know COVID's caused a lot of things to get more expensive. So I'm sure those prices have gone up. And something else to remember. Your caregivers are employees. They're either your own employees because you hired them, or they're hired through an agency, which means they are still employees. That means labor laws from California and your local cities also apply. So again, you have to follow sick time, overtime, and minimum wage. If you violate any of these laws, you can be liable for damages. So you want to be very careful. And especially if you're hiring on your own, maintain proper documentation of hours worked and the payments made to the caregiver. Having a paper trail protects you. And, if you ever get sued, you want to be sure you have something you can point to. So unfortunately, caregivers also are put in a position of power over very vulnerable populations. And unfortunately, there is a new scam that seems to be going around involving caregivers. So the National Center on Elder Abuse has seen a very similar fact pattern occur with quite a few people now, and it's something to keep your eyes peeled for. So how this scam works is usually an older adult will have a caregiver, and then at the end of their shift, the caregiver might say, "I'm really tired. I don't feel like driving home. Can I just spend the night here? I'm going to be here tomorrow anyway." And you want to be very nice, and you say, "Okay, yeah, sure. You can spend the night here." And then over the night, no care is provided. They just sleep and then, they start their shift and then they provide care again. But unfortunately, what can happen is either, a few weeks or months after they work for you, either they might quit or you might fire them. They then might get an attorney and say, I spent the night at my employer's house and they didn't pay me for it. And now that's wage theft. That's illegal. Now they can sue you for money. And, if all you can say in response is they did spend the night, but they didn't administer any care and you have no proof of it, it doesn't look great. The best advice we can give regarding this kind of scam would be to simply tell your caregiver, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with the legal liability this opens me up to. Can you please go home? But I also know that's not easy for a lot of people to say. I am not an attorney. I don't know how well this would work in court. But if you do not want to refuse or you don't want to tell them to go home, what you can try doing instead is, draft up a paper saying that they will spend the night on, this date, but they will not administer any care, and then have them sign it both the day they're staying and then the day after to certify they did not administer any care. If they have a signed document saying they didn't administer any care, it'd be a lot harder for them to say in court, well, that I lied, but I put my own signature and lied. Like that's harder to prove. But again, best case scenario is just tell them to go home. So if you're aware of any facts or any cases like this, either happening to you or somebody you know, you can always send an email over to the National Center on Elder Abuse. And the more information they get, the more they can spread awareness and help people fight back. So beyond that, we have a few additional resources here. We have the Medicare website. You can always contact them either at their website or call them, and they'll have a lot of information about their home health aid services, so skilled care and how they cover it. There's also Hand in Hand. This is just an organization that helps give tips and resources for interviewing and hiring caregivers, because I think a lot of us have never dealt with interviewing and hiring people directly. So it's good to just have a good idea of what you want to be asking. There's also just the California Partnership for Long-Term Care and the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care information. They all have information regarding long-term care. Also, the California Department of Aging, they do have a booklet called Taking Care of Tomorrow. They have a booklet called Taking Care of Tomorrow. And what that booklet does is it just outlines in a bit more detail what options might be available for you. Of course, it's not localized to Alameda County. It's for all of California, but it still has some information that might prove useful. And of course, you can always contact HICAP. It can either be about, Medicare not covering skilled health care or just any Medicare questions you may have. We have our office number here. We also have the statewide number if you ever move or you just want to contact the statewide number. And beyond that, you can always contact our front desk as well. This is our legal number. If you contact us at this number, we'll be able to assist you and hopefully get you in contact with an attorney. But beyond that, that's our presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask right now.
Darren, I'm going to go ahead and thank you for your time and just stop our recording.